Welcome to The Nation. I'm Jessy Chahal. With me today is Seng, Chief Executive Officer of Teach for Malaysia, a passionate advocate as well for equal education opportunities for all children. Now, in the recent budget 2026, education remained a key focus with increased allocations for infrastructure upgrades, teacher training and inclusive training. Let's take a closer look at what these initiatives mean for Malaysia's education system moving forward. Seng, it's good to have you with us. Of course, the topic of education is of utmost importance, and right now as well something in the forefront because of some of the controversies, or rather some of the tragic incidents that we're seeing happen within mainstream schools. Let's begin with the budget for now. We look at the recent tabled budget that has been described as one that emphasizes human capital development and this concept of future readiness. From your perspective, what are some key takeaways from the budget that the Prime Minister had tabled when it comes down to education, and what caught your attention really?
Yeah, I think that there were some, well, first I think it's commendable that the government continues to prioritize education and keep it at the forefront, with it receiving again the highest allocation in the budget, right? And I think that some of the things that stood out were some of the investments, I think, in teachers that this budget announced. And at Teach for Malaysia, we're all about ensuring that teachers have the training and support that they need to be the best that they can be. And the quality of an education system cannot exceed the quality of its teachers. So, for example, the almost 115 million ringgit investment to prepare teachers for the upcoming curriculum, the new curriculum that's going to be rolled out in 2027, as well as to support improving STEM pedagogy, I think is a commendable investment. I think that also something that is important is the preschool investments. Under RMK 13 or the 13th Malaysia Plan, preschool is going to become mandatory, and so ensuring that there's more investment at the preschool level is important. But also what we see was that there was a small allocation towards this project called Program Anak Kita, which is about remedial education and ensuring that kids are able to receive support so that they don't drop out from the education system. And so it's important that kids get the right foundation at the beginning through preschool, but also there are kids that fall through the cracks, and ensuring that there's a safety net for these kids is a lot about what Program Anak Kita focuses on. So ensuring that kids have the foundations, but they're supported throughout school. And then I think some of the things that were also steps in the right direction were the support for the 5,800 students from low-income backgrounds who have the potential to receive free education through PTPTN. So I think those are some of the highlights.
Right. So with those sort of gaps filled, what were some of the misses of the budget in terms of its allocation and its peak into the education system in Malaysia? Yeah.
So, I think that, I think those things that I highlighted were steps in the right direction. I think some of those allocations could be larger. I think that there's still more that we can do to invest in teachers, for example, and ensure that they're really receiving the adequate sort of training and support that they need. I think, but I think also beyond just the budget allocation, what's going to be critical is the quality assurance of the kind of training and support that does get delivered. And I think that the ministry really leveraging these funds to ensure that they're bringing in the best, highest quality training providers for teachers, or ensuring that within the ministry that's utilized to ensure that teachers really, really do get the training and support that is holistic for them is critical. And so I think that beyond the budget allocation, it's really about how the funds do get spent at the end of the day. And I think it's how quickly those are able to get deployed and get to the ground. Let's say if we talk about some of the infrastructure investments. I do think though that there is more room to think about some innovations within the system. And so I think that one of the challenges in our education system is that it's a highly centralized system. And I think that there are there is room for experimentation, for example, like through innovation schools, for example, like if you allow schools to sort of operate in a different context beyond sort of we have to follow exactly what the ministry says, and allocating funding to allow, for example, private-public partnerships where there could be collaborations to run sort of innovative models of schools that are very different to MOE schools.
With that in mind, of course, that is something that must be reviewed moving forward, because the education is something that was created or implemented decades ago, and it's high time for us to review that and to move forward with innovation and technology and whatnot, and do that urgently as well. Now, from where you sit, Soon Seng, how do you view Malaysia's education system, and what are some of your grievances, or what are some of the hits, you would say, with our education system as a whole, before we really break down what the budget is doing for this ecosystem?
I think that the Malaysian education system, since the independence of Malaya, has been very successful at building out sort of the physical access to school, right? So we have almost universal enrollment at the primary school level, and we have built schools across the entire country for children to have physical access to school. I think the challenge then remains in terms of ensuring that when kids do get to school, do they get the education and support that will help them to really maximize their learning possibility, right? And so I think that in a World Bank study on sort of the years of education that a student attends versus the years that they actually sit in school, out of the potential 12 years that a child goes through the education system in Malaysia, on average they're learning 9 years, and so there's about 3 years of a gap between the amount of time they spend versus the actual learning that they do. Right. And so there is a gap in terms of whether students are actually maximizing their learning potential, and a lot of that comes to ensuring that we have teachers who are able to meet the needs of their students, but also school leadership that is able to identify what are the specific challenges or gaps in their context.
So there are many pieces in motion here that all need to work in sync and work together. Education did receive one of the largest allocations again in this year's budget. That's up 66.2 billion ringgit. And nearly 2 billion of that has been set aside to upgrade over 520 dilapidated schools, especially in Sabah and Sarawak, as well as to improve teachers' facilities. How crucial is it to improve? You talked about physical access. How important is it, and how urgent is it to improve the physical learning environment to drive better educational outcomes? This
is an interesting question, because I think that the reality is that you could have very, very basic infrastructure, but still, if you have a great teacher, you're still able to really support kids to have great learning outcomes. But in the Malaysian context, where we do have a lot of infrastructure that's in place, I think this investment is important. And when the ministry classifies a dilapidated school, those schools are really schools that do need the physical investment and may potentially have safety risks for both the students as well as the teachers who are serving there. So I think it's important to address the dilapidated schools piece, but that's only the starting point. And really, to think about the quality of education a child receives, we have to think about it holistically beyond just the physical infrastructure investment.
The Prime Minister is, of course, in the news as we speak as well. He's calling the education system deeply flawed because it prioritizes academics over morals, of course, with recent light with 2 of the violent cases that have taken place in school. The Prime Minister also described what is a silent crime must be eradicated, and the government will table the Anti-Bullying Bill 2025 soon. That word worries me a little bit at this point. How significant is this step in ensuring safer learning environments in Malaysia's school and campuses? Are we far from reality? Do we need a quick reality check, a grasp on things more quickly? Where do you see this urgency and this need stemming from in terms of how fast it must be implemented?
Yeah, I think that these past couple of days, weeks, and months have truly been a wake-up call about some of the challenges that exist societally. And I think that it's not a Ministry of Education alone issue, right? And I think that as a nation, we really need to reflect on how we as a society band together to think about how we shape a better future collectively with our students, with our children for the future of society, right? I think that a lot of what kids are exposed to today goes far beyond the walls of a classroom and the walls of a school, right? If we think about what kids potentially have access to on social media, through the devices that they have access to, there's a lot more that we need to think about when it comes to child protection and safety, not just in their learning, but how they're holistically growing up, right? I do think that the anti-bullying bill is a step in the right direction, but beyond the bill itself, it has to come down to, at the school level, more effective and practical child protection and safeguarding policies that are a lot more practical. And I also think that the key thing then comes down to the training around these policies and how do we actually think about safeguarding and child protection, and how are teachers and school leaders equipped to be able to implement these policies
We're talking all
effectively.
things from a basic CCTV all the way up to the trainings that you've mentioned as well, and the upskilling and the ability to move with times in that way, to say that the education is just not limited within the confines of the four walls of the classroom. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that there are, like I said, on the infrastructure piece earlier, there are some pieces where we can think about infrastructure, but it's also about, are teachers equipped to be able to identify signs, right? Can they understand the social emotional aspects of what's going on in the classroom? And can they create environments where students are able to express challenges that they're feeling, right? And I think that part of the challenge is we expect a lot from teachers. There's so much that we expect from them, right? They've got to be able to help students achieve academically, but they've also got to be able to be a counselor. And in many ways, sometimes they're like a second parent or even a parent to kids that may come from a really difficult background at home, right? And so to me and our position at Teach for Malaysia is that it really all boils down to how are we supporting our teachers and giving them the training, but also the support that they need to be effective.
Earlier you spoke about the AKP, or rather the Anak Kita program that aims to address student dropouts directly. From your experience with underserved communities, what are the main barriers that are causing students to drop out or leave school, and how can community-based interventions help? As you said earlier, we can't pin it down all on the teachers themselves and blame them for everything. It has to be a holistic approach.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we see is that students who come from low-income backgrounds, from underserved communities, they come into schools already behind their peers, right? So you imagine a kid that comes from a background where they have educated parents, where they have, have the financial resources to go to a good kindergarten. They come to school a step or multiple steps ahead from their peers who maybe don't have literate parents and maybe haven't actually even themselves gone to kindergarten, or maybe they went to a low quality preschooling option, right? So they already come to school behind their peers. And so then being able to identify, but what happens then when they go into class is that a teacher who is teaching, somewhere between 20 to 40 students in a classroom has to then be able to figure out how to differentiate to the needs of their students. And oftentimes there are many students that fall through the cracks. And so, and that is almost inevitable in a system. And what matters is, can you identify the students falling through the cracks and provide a safety net for them so that they don't fall further behind? Because what happens is that if a student is already behind, that only compounds over time. They don't catch up if they're left behind by the system.
Right. And so on that note as well, there is a plan by the government to build 38 new schools and rebuild 2 vernacular schools in Pahang and in Perak, alongside 350 new preschool classrooms using existing buildings. I do not know if this is enough, but it's a start at this point. Do you see these developments as an effective step towards addressing things that we are already existing in the schools right now? You're talking about overcrowding, improving access, improving the utilities that are existing within these oldish school buildings, and then most importantly, to promote equal educational opportunities for all.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I think that infrastructure investments are good and important investments, right? And I think especially when we think about urbanization in Malaysia and population demographic shifts, we know that there are certain parts of the country where there's just the population density is just so much higher, and then schools there are basically oversubscribed, right? And the teacher to student ratio in a classroom can become very, very high, and therefore that can lead to kids falling through the cracks, right? And so I think that this kind of investment does make sense, but like I said, an infrastructure investment is only the starting point, right? And it's really what we do, the ecosystem around a child as they go throughout their schooling life cycle that is critical.
And talking about equal educational opportunities, we come to the point that is education inequality, and that is quite stark within certain segments. The key programs that were also expanded via the budget to help underprivileged or underserved families and even children. There are a couple. There's the federal small scholarships that is at 150 million ringgit. Then the supplementary food program at 870 million ringgit, and the early schooling assistance 150 ringgit for all 5.2 million students. How far do you think these measures will really go to address the root of education inequality?
Yeah, I mean, I think that these are really important measures, and there's a lot of research that shows sort of a clear link between nutrition and a child's educational outcomes, right? And if a child comes to school without having had proper nutrition, without having had breakfast, if they're hungry while they're learning, that's a basic human need that needs to be satisfied before we can expect a child to be learning at their optimum capacity, right? And so I think that these are important things, and I think that also some of the things that we need to consider when education is free in Malaysia, but there are other costs, right? You have to buy uniforms, you have to buy stationery and all of these things. So I think all of these supports are absolutely critical, and these are important investments. I think that they can go further. For example, supporting as secondary school becomes mandatory, extending the supplementary feeding programs across secondary school is also something that can be considered. But ultimately, it is really also about ensuring that beyond the basic access things, which I think Malaysia does relatively well, actually, that's a strength that we should celebrate. It is about what we do once we've satisfied sort of these bottom of the pyramid, Maslow hierarchy kind of needs.
Well, the Prime Minister also announced major support for children with special needs, or OKU. That, of course, signals the government's interest and priority for inclusive education. There are 2 new special education secondary schools that was announced, as well as 35 new special education blocks in something known as Tunas Istimewa classes for children with mild autism. What and how far do you think this will go? And is the problem more serious than we're seeing here at the surface level?
I think that it's so important and critical that we are investing in more inclusive education provisions for students, right? And I think all of this is good and is a step in the right direction. I think an area that we do need to consider in Malaysia is there isn't always a need to sort of segregate children that may have special needs. And there's actually a lot more that we can do to create a more inclusive mainstream class. And I think that there are practices that we can support teachers to figure out how do they, in a regular mainstream class, be able to help include children that may have special needs train them to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I want to jump in there as well. Speaking of teachers and teacher training, 115 million ringgit allocated for that, including STEM and preparations for 2027. As someone who's deeply involved with the teacher development at Teach for Malaysia, how do you see this shaping classroom practices as well as teacher motivation? That too is important.
Yeah, and so I think that this is an important investment, and I think that it's especially critical when the new curriculum rolls out in 2027, that teachers are prepared for that, right? So I think this is a really, really important investment. I do think that one of the things that is important is that when we consider teacher training, going back to the piece around what's the quality of training and support that teachers get? Because oftentimes what we see is sort of this, they call it like a waterfall system, right? So it's somebody at the top who becomes the expert, then they'll train a bunch of teachers at the state level or a bunch of trainers at the state level, then they train the district, and then that goes down to schools, and that kind of dilutes the quality and effectiveness. And oftentimes if a teacher just attends a workshop or a training event, it's very hard to actually translate that into practice into the classroom, because there are very unique specific challenges that a teacher will face in their classrooms.
Right.
So not just the training, but also the coaching support that teachers need is critical to ensure that
within
applies
the
and
classroom.
translates into the class.
When you heard some of the new initiatives under this announcement, what stumped you? What got you really excited? What did you think, aha, they've got it right? One single most transformative initiative or change that's going to help Malaysia's education system.
Yeah, you know, I'm really excited about the investment in the teacher training, the in-service teacher training piece, right? And like if we kind of compare that to the standard budget, there's about 19 million in the past 14 million that gets invested into teachers. And if you think about that as a professional development budget split across the 417,000 teachers, that's less than 50 ringgit per teacher a year, right? And so this is a much higher increase in that allocation, but the key question is ensuring that it's deployed effectively and that there's going to be quality training and support that gets invested in as a result of this allocation.
So we do still come back to the last mile and ensuring that with the budget there is proper implementation or deployment rather, and that it doesn't fall through the cracks or have any leakages in its way
and
to
I think
the
that
classroom.
this is the opportunity for the Ministry of Education to work alongside other parties, right, who are have a proven track record of expertise in these areas, working with civil society organizations, training providers who do have expertise, and opening that up a little bit.
And if they came to you and said, Soon Seng, help us walk through some areas that still need greater attention, where would you direct them to, and what would you say would be the starting point? Would it be teacher empowerment or reform of the education or even digital access?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely empowering teachers is absolutely critical, but I do think another aspect that we need to consider is how do we begin to decentralize at some points decision-making powers to the school level where it makes sense, because the one big challenge is that our system is very, very centralized, and everyone sort of has to comply with decisions that are made at the top. But actually the people who understand the challenges that their students are facing, that their communities are facing, are the people on the ground. So how do we see people on the ground having more empowerment, I think is critical.
What would your message be overall to where we are with our education today and where we need to get to?
You know, I think that at the end of the day, there is so much hope. And I think that
hope enough?
Well,
this is education.
I think that there are many challenges that we see, right, in our education system, and I will be the first to admit that, and recognize that there are many frustrations. But also, we have to believe that we can have a better education system for our students. We have what it takes. We have the resource in Malaysia. We have the human capital. It's about how we allocate that effectively, right? And so that's why ultimately, at the end of the day, it is about the quality of our delivery and ensuring that we have mechanisms to hold ourselves accountable, right? To hold the Ministry of Education accountable, that there's transparency of how the funds are used, of how impact is being created.
And will you be in 6 months sort of looking at how the budget has been carried out and laid down, and would you be looking at some sort of checkpoints?
Oh, absolutely. We'll definitely be looking to see how this 115 million is being deployed, and because I think that is a big opportunity to invest in teachers.
Well, thank you, Seng, for coming in and sharing your thoughts with us. Well, education is and will always be the heartbeat of a nation's progress. It shapes how we think, how we innovate, and how we lead. Budget 2026 strengthens that vision, investing in teachers and students and equal opportunities for all. The real challenge now is to turn these commitments into lasting change for generations to come. The education system is under the spotlight at this point, and change must come fast and it must come soon. I'm Jessy Chahal. This has been The Nation Merealisi Belanjawan 2026. Thank you for watching and follow us for more in-depth conversations on topics that matter.